Financial evaluation for parents and grandparents, or as I like to call it, importing daycare for your child. If you're looking to bring your mom and dad in Canada, then you must submit the form 5768 to prove to IRCC that you make enough money to take care of your old cuties. So in this video of the two-part video series of form 5768, we are going to cover the first section of the form, calculating the family size. I know it can be a very confusing section for you to fill out, so we will break it down step by step so that we come up with the right family size, which then we will use in the second part of the video, which is determining the income requirements. My name is Suyash, I live in Toronto and I work as a banking professional helping wealthy corporations fill their tax forms. I do this YouTube thing on the side where sadly I'm still filling forms. So I guess my life as a YouTuber has really taken a completely unique form. Get it? Let's begin. Okay, so first step, you get to this page, Guide 5772, Application to Sponsor Parents and Grandparents. It's linked in the description below, so click and follow along. The first thing you see here is this note that you need to now apply online. So I hope you know how the online portal works by now. If you don't, there's a video linked in the description below, should be showing up here on the cards here, so check it out. Then what you do is you scroll down and click on step 2, complete this application. Then scroll down further and this is where you'll find this form, Financial Evaluation for Parents and Grandparents 5768. So you know the process, just click and download it, save it to your desktop or downloads folder, and then go to your downloads and desktop folder to open it. If you try to open it from your saves folder here, it might not open, okay? So what we are going to do is only cover section 1 through section 7 in this video. So what we are going to get is the right family size towards the end of this video. Now, once we have the family size, we'll use that family size in the next section of the form to determine the income requirements. So before we begin, let me tell you something. Calculating family size and reading the income chart for the previous 3 years for parent sponsorship is a very confusing thing. Okay, so I made an entire video explaining family size and income requirement in detail. It should be showing up here on the cards here, and it's also linked in the description below. So I would highly recommend definitely go and check that video out before you continue with this section of the form. Okay, otherwise you might get confused. And if you are good on family size and income requirement, then continue to watch. Okay, so the way we are going to do this is we are going to look at 3 different scenarios from easy to complex. If you've seen my other videos, that's how I like to do it. So for each of those scenarios, we will understand how to populate each of these sections here. And then we'll come up with a family size towards the end for each of those scenarios. And these scenarios should ultimately give you a solid foundation on how to apply this logic to any situation. Alright, so let's start with scenario 1. You, your wife and your child are Canadian citizens living in Canada, and the husband is sponsoring his parents who are right now in India. So your total family size becomes you, wife, child, mom and dad, 5 people, okay? So that will be scenario 1. So let's proceed with how to fill out the rest of the details. So number 1A, is your spouse or common law partner co-signing? For this scenario, let's assume nobody is co-signing, okay? So you're just going to check no, okay? This is where you list your spouse's name. In this case, in this scenario, the wife's name and date of birth. Under B, you will list your full name, okay? The sponsor's full name, all right? 2, it's simply asking about you, which means are you in the family? So it's already populated as 1, so don't do anything about it, it's correct, all right? 3A, current undertaking. So before we move on, let me explain what undertaking is. Undertaking is this application that you are sending, okay? So this current application, which the husband in this case is doing for sponsoring his parents, is the undertaking, all right? And it's asking number of persons included in box 3 of the generic application form of Canada 0008. Basically what it's asking is how many people are in this application. So remember, the husband is sponsoring his mom and dad, so there are 2 people in this application. Even if the principal applicant might only be 1 person, let's say the dad is the principal applicant and mom is the dependent on the principal applicant, the number of people will still be 2. So you are going to list 2 here, okay? And this agrees with what you will see on 0008. So let me show you 0008. So this is the generic application form for Canada. You must have filled this out or must be in the process of filling this out. By the way, if you don't know how to fill this form out, it should be showing up here on the cards here, and there is a link in the video description which you can click to go to that video right now and understand how to fill this form out, okay? So if you've written 2 under section 3 of this 0008, as talked about in this form, number of persons included in box 3, so this is box 3, that is the number that you are going to list here, and that is the undertaking. All right, so undertaking is this application. Clear? All right, let's move on to 3B, previous undertakings. So what is a previous undertaking? Basically any application that you have done in the past, not yourself but sponsoring someone, is known as previous undertaking. All right, so 3B1 is asking you number of persons included in previous undertakings you signed as a sponsor that are still in effect. So basically what this means is if you sponsored someone in the past and they are still permanent residents, which means their undertaking is still in effect. So still in effect means they are still permanent residents, okay? Then you will have to list that number here. So if you sponsored your wife in the past and she became a permanent resident and is still a permanent resident, then you are going to list 1 here, okay? But remember what our case was? Our case is all of you living in Canada right now are citizens. So the husband and wife and child are all citizens. So even if the husband, the sponsor, sponsored his wife, she has now become a citizen and you cannot list citizens here, okay? You are still financially responsible for those citizens, but you cannot list citizens here because that does not qualify as undertaking. So you are going to list 0 here. And this is all going to make sense towards the end, so bear with me, all right? But only list here in this box if you've actually sponsored someone and their undertaking or their residency is still in effect, all right? And if you want to read about all of this, there is a help center page that explains what is a current undertaking, what is a previous undertaking, what does undertaking in effect mean, not in effect mean, and I'm going to link this page in the description below. So feel free to read, but basically I just gave you the gist of what the undertaking means. All right, let's move forward. 3B2, number of persons included in previous undertakings you signed as a sponsor that are not yet in effect. So not yet in effect means, let's say you have sponsored someone recently as a PR or as a citizen and their sponsorship has not come through, which means the application is still being processed or pending, then you are going to list that number here. All right. So let's assume you sponsored your dependent child or a dependent sibling and their application is still pending, then they will also be a part of your family. Again, check out the video to learn more about family details. And then you will also list them here. All right. Let's assume for this case, you didn't do that. So list 0. All right. 3B3, number of persons included in previous undertakings you co-signed. So for this scenario, let's assume you have never co-signed any application. Okay. We are going to talk about co-signing next, but for the purpose of this scenario, no co-signing. So just list 0 and 0 again. All right. Section 4. So section 4 applies only if your spouse or common law is co-signing the undertaking. So you're not using any co-signer. Remember, this is scenario 1. So you are simply going to list 0 here throughout the box. All right. Let's come to number 5. Your spouse or common law partner, if not included in 3 above. So this is where you account for your spouse. Okay. But only if you've not included them in section 3. All right. So as you can see, we have not really counted our spouse. We've only counted ourselves and we've only counted our parents, the husband's parents who he is sponsoring in this application, current undertaking. So you've not really accounted for your wife. Okay. So you will account for your wife here. Okay. And the reason you did not account for your wife here is because she is a citizen, so her undertaking is no longer active. All right, no longer in effect. Let's assume you were a citizen and you had sponsored your wife and she became a permanent resident in 2019, okay? And right now this is 2021, so it's only been 2 years. Her residency is going to be active for 3 years and she can also renew it, all right? So if that was the case, you would actually list 1 here because this agrees with the statement number of persons included in previous undertakings you signed as a sponsor and are still in effect. So yes, you signed an undertaking for your wife and she's still a permanent resident, so you would list here. But then you would remove this 1 from this number 5 in order to avoid double counting, all right? So don't get confused between 5 and 3. You are going to count your wife, but you are not going to double count her, and that is why if you list your wife here, if you count for your wife here in section 3, you don't need to count for your wife again in section 5, all right? So for this scenario, like we discussed, you're all citizens, husband, wife and child are citizens, so wife should be counted here, all right, because she has no undertaking in effect. So put 0 back. So let's calculate how many members so far. 4. By the way, this box actually calculates the total of the numbers that you put here, all right? So you have total of 5 members, right? But you've only accounted for yourself here, your parents and your wife. So obviously under section 6, it says every other family member not included above and dependent on you financially. Obviously your child has not been included above and is dependent on you financially. So this is where you will list your child. And if you press enter, this number comes out to be 5. So now you have correctly determined your family size, all right? You already knew your family size was 5, but now you have done it correctly, okay? So in the next section of this form, when you fill this out, you are going to look up income requirements for 5 people, all right? Okay, so for the second scenario, let's assume the same family size, same dynamic, 3 of you, husband, wife and child living in Canada as citizens, husband sponsoring parents living in India, total of 5 people, but this time wife is a cosigner, all right? So in this box, you'll check yes, all right? And again, this is where you provide the family name, given name and date of birth of your spouse, and then your full name, all right? Then you come back to section 2. This is already going to be pre-populated, so leave it. 3A, current undertaking. So number of persons included in box 3, we just went over this, so this is going to be 2, mom and dad. 3B1, number of persons included in previous undertakings you signed as a sponsor that are still in effect. So you sponsored your wife, but it was a long time ago. Now she's become a citizen, so her undertaking is no longer in effect. So this is still 0, this is 0, this is 0, this is 0, pretty much the same, okay? We are still assuming that you have never co-signed any application, all right? Now, section 4, this section will be about your co-signer, which means your wife in this case. So number 1, it says number of persons included in previous undertakings that your wife has signed as a sponsor, which are still in effect. So pretty much the exact same logic that we discussed in these 4 sections is going to apply here, all right? So just for the purposes of this scenario, let's assume your wife, who's the co-signer of this application, has not really sponsored anyone yet and there is no pending application. So these 2 boxes become 0. And she has not co-signed any application in the past or co-signed any application that is pending approval yet. So these 2 boxes become 0. All right, pretty straightforward. She is co-signing the current undertaking, but this section 3 and 4 of section 4 are asking about co-signing a previous undertaking. Let's assume she's not done that. We are going to take a look at it next, so don't worry, we are not going to skip that. But for this section, for this scenario, let's assume it's 0. So again, you come back to 5, and because you did not list your wife in section 3 here anywhere, you are going to account for her, all right? So you put 1 here, and we forgot the child again, so let's put 1 here. So if you hit enter, you come back to the same number 5, all right? So as you see from the first scenario to the second scenario, even though your cosigner variable changed, you went from no cosigner to cosigner, the family size didn't really change, okay? So that completes scenario 2. Now let's make it really complicated and understand a third complex scenario. I think that is really going to help you understand how all this section works. So let's look at the third scenario, and this time let's really complicate this thing. So you, the husband, your wife and child are living in Canada as citizens. The husband is sponsoring his parents who are in India right now. So current undertaking is 2. The wife has already sponsored her parents recently, so they've become permanent residents recently and they are now in Canada living with you guys, okay? And you, the husband, co-signed that application for the wife, okay? And right now, when you are sponsoring for your parents, your wife is co-signing that application. Complicated enough? I know, I can sense so many of you leaving the video right now, but doesn't matter. Let me reiterate. 7 people in the family. You, your wife, your child, wife's mom, wife's dad, and now being sponsored, your mom and your dad. Got it? Let me look at my hands to make sure oh yeah, this is 7. Okay, so how to go about filling this section? Let's proceed. So you are going to check yes in 1A because you're using a cosigner. Provide the details just like you provided before, okay? Come back to this section. Under 2, you're simply going to list 1. 3A, current undertaking. This is going to remain 2 because the current application is being sent for 2 people. All right. Then 3B1. So number of persons included in previous undertakings you signed as a sponsor and that are still in effect. So this is not applicable because you sponsored your wife so many years ago and now she's a citizen. So there is no undertaking in effect. So this is going to remain 0. 3B2, number of persons included in previous undertakings that are not yet in effect. So this is also no, there is no pending permanent residence application on behalf of the husband as the sponsor. Okay, so this is 0. 3B3, okay, so now pay attention here. Number of persons included in previous undertakings you co-signed where these undertakings are still in effect. Yes. Remember, our scenario is the husband co-signed the application of sponsorship for the wife's parents. And it's still in effect because the wife's parents, husband's in-laws, are still permanent residents. Okay? So, you are going to list 2 here. Okay? We are also going to look at what happens when the wife's parents become citizens. Okay? So, 3B4, number of persons included in previous undertakings you co-signed where there are undertakings not yet in effect. So this is again 0, there's no pending undertaking as a co-signer. Alright, you co-signed an application for your wife's parents and that application was approved and they are still permanent residents, that's why you listed 2 here. Okay, once you're done with this section, this is the section for your wife to complete. Your wife is co-signing the application of you sponsoring your parents. So this section will apply. So let's see if we have to fill these boxes. 4.1, number of persons in previous undertaking that your wife has signed as a sponsor that are still in effect. Okay, so this means that your wife actually sponsored her parents and it is still in effect. Okay, but if you list 2 here, you are just going to double count those parents here. Okay, so it clearly says here do not include persons already counted in 2 or 3B3. Okay, so as you can see, we already counted wife's parents in 3B3, number of persons included in previous undertakings that the husband co-signed and were still in effect. You should not include them in 3B1 even if it applies. The reason is pretty simple and obvious. If you include them again, you are just going to double count your in-laws and it's simply going to increase the number of the family to an incorrect number. So keep this 0. 4.2, number of persons in previous undertakings that your spouse signed as a sponsor that are not yet in effect. So for the purpose of this video, let's assume this is 0, which means your wife has not applied for anyone whose application is still pending or not yet approved. Okay, by the way, rejected applications are not the same as not yet in effect. Okay, not yet in effect only means applications that are pending approval. If they were rejected, you do not count them. Okay, so 4.3, number of persons included in previous undertakings that your spouse co-signed. So your spouse did not co-sign any application before. she's only co-signing currently. Okay, so this is 0 and this is 0. All right. Number 5, your spouse. So as you can see, we did not provide information about the spouse yet because her undertaking is not yet in effect. Otherwise, we would have listed her here if she was a permanent resident. But she's not a permanent resident, a citizen. Even though you sponsored her several years ago, you are going to list her here. So 1. And number 6, every other family member. Forgot the poor kid again, so we are going to list him or her here. And as you can see, the number comes out to be 7, which agrees with the actual number of people in your family. All right. So the reason I wanted to cover this scenario, even though this would be rare, just to explain to you how undertaking works and how previous and current undertaking and how co-signing those undertakings can actually change these numbers and how you can avoid double counting these numbers. All right, because these numbers will always add up to this box here, and this will be your family size, which will determine the income. All right, so it's important to come up with this right number here, but it's also important to come up with this number the right way, and this is the right way to do it. Okay, so that was section 1, the family size for the 5768 form. Based on this family size, in the next video we will cover income requirements. I know it's a lot to take, so take a break, take a nap, even sleep the night off. I'll be right here researching more difficult topics because I've had way too much coffee and I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. See you in the next one.